There's a pattern running quietly beneath everything you do with money. You might not see it, but it's been there for years, maybe decades, guiding decisions you believe are yours. It wasn't installed by logic or reason. It didn't arrive through books or mentors. It formed early, when you were too young to question it, too small to understand what was being woven into you. And now it moves through you like breathing, automatic and invisible, shaping how you earn, spend, save, and feel about every dollar that passes through your hands. This pattern didn't begin with your first job or your first paycheck. It began long before that, in moments you probably don't remember, in the way your parents spoke about money or didn't speak about it, in the silence that followed certain questions, in the tension that filled the room when bills arrived, in the relief or the fear that colored every financial decision made around you. You were watching, even when no one thought you were. You were learning, even when no one was teaching. And what you learned became the template for everything that followed. You don't remember choosing this pattern. You don't recall the moment it was installed. But it's there, running like code in the background of every financial choice you make. It decides before you decide. It reacts before you think. It creates the feelings that rise up when money enters the conversation. Feelings so immediate and so strong. They seem like facts rather than learned responses. And because they feel like facts, you never question them. You just assume this is how you are with money. You assume it's your nature, your personality, your fate. But it's not, it's a pattern. And patterns can be seen, understood, and changed. The first step is recognizing that what feels like instinct is actually imprint. What feels like personality is actually programming. And what feels permanent is actually just familiar. The life you're living with money right now, the stress or the ease, the scarcity or the flow, the fear or the calm, it all traces back to those early years when you were small and the adults around you were showing you, through their actions and their emotions, what money means. They didn't mean to teach you fear. They didn't intend to pass down scarcity. They were just doing what they knew, carrying their own patterns, repeating their own inherited stories. But you absorbed it all. Your nervous system took notes. And now, decades later, those notes are still being read, still shaping your reality, still determining how you feel every time you look at your bank account or make a purchase or think about your future. The pattern isn't you, but until you see it, it controls you. And the moment you see it, everything begins to shift. Not immediately, not all at once, but steadily, inevitably. Because awareness is the crack in the pattern. Awareness is where choice enters. Awareness is where you stop being a passenger in your own financial life and become the one steering. This is where your transformation begins. Not in fixing or forcing, but in simply seeing what's been invisible all along. The pattern is real. But so is your power to change it. Most people believe their relationship with money is just who they are. They think their spending habits, their saving patterns, their fear or their recklessness are simply part of their personality. But personality isn't what's driving this. What's driving it is memory, old memory, stored not in words, but in feeling. When you were small, you didn't understand concepts like scarcity or abundance. You didn't know what financial security meant, but you felt it. You felt it in the tone of voice used when money was discussed. You felt it in the stress that tightened the air. You felt it in the way certain desires were met with warmth and others with sudden coldness. And your nervous system recorded all of it. It built a map, a blueprint for survival. If money was scarce, you learned to brace for lack. If it was used as punishment or reward, you learned to tie your worth to it. If it caused conflict, you learned to avoid it, hide from it, or control it tightly. These responses weren't chosen. They were adaptive. They were how you learned to stay safe in the emotional environment you grew up in. But now, years later, those same responses are still running, still trying to protect you from dangers that no longer exist. You can see this playing out if you look closely. Maybe you earn well but still feel broke. Maybe you can't spend without guilt. Maybe you avoid your bank statements because looking at them triggers something deep and uncomfortable. Maybe you hoard money even when you don't need to. Maybe you give it away too easily, unable to hold on to it. Maybe you sabotage yourself just as you're about to break through. These behaviors don't make sense logically, but emotionally, they're perfectly consistent with the environment you grew up in. The child in you is still trying to navigate the rules of that old world. The child in you is still trying to stay safe, stay loved, stay secure. And the strategies that worked back then are still running now, even though the world has changed, even though you've changed, even though those strategies no longer serve you. The pattern doesn't update itself. It doesn't check to see if it's still relevant. It just runs over and over until you consciously intervene. This is why changing your relationship with money isn't about willpower or discipline. It's about awareness. It's about seeing the pattern for what it is, a survival response from childhood, and recognizing that you're no longer that child. You're no longer in that environment. You're no longer powerless. The old rules don't apply anymore. But until you see that clearly, until you feel it in your body, and not just understand it intellectually, the pattern will keep running. It will keep shaping your choices. It will keep limiting your possibilities. The good news is that the pattern isn't buried too deep to reach. It's not too complex to understand. It's actually quite simple once you start looking. It's made of moments, memories, and meanings you assigned to money before you knew you were assigning them. And once you bring those into the light, once you see where they came from and why they formed, they lose their grip. They stop feeling like truth and start feeling like history. And history can be honored without being repeated. History can be acknowledged without being obeyed. You see it play out in subtle ways. Maybe you can't spend money without feeling guilty, even when you have more than enough. Maybe you can't save without feeling anxious, like something terrible is always about to happen. Maybe you earn well but still feel broke, no matter how much comes in. Maybe you avoid looking at your accounts because the act of seeing the numbers triggers something deep and uncomfortable. Maybe you overspend to prove something, to feel something, to fill something that was never really about money at all. These aren't flaws, they're echoes. Echoes of the environment you grew up in, the lessons you absorbed without words, the emotional imprints left behind by people who were doing their best with what they knew. Your parents, caregivers, or whoever shaped your early world, they were carrying their own patterns too. They inherited them just as you inherited yours. And unless someone stops to look closely, these patterns just keep moving forward, generation after generation, invisible and unquestioned. The pattern doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send you a memo explaining its origins. It just operates, quietly and efficiently, beneath the surface of your awareness. You think you're making rational decisions, weighing options, choosing freely. But underneath, the pattern is already steering. It's already determining what feels safe and what feels dangerous, what feels possible and what feels out of reach. It's filtering your reality through the lens of those early experiences, and you don't even know it's happening. This is why two people can have the same income and completely different experiences of financial security. This is why someone can have wealth and still feel poor, or have little and still feel abundant. The external numbers matter less than the internal pattern. The pattern decides what the numbers mean. It decides how you feel about them. It decides what you do with them. And until you become conscious of the pattern, you're living according to rules you never agreed to. Rules that were written by a child trying to survive in an environment that no longer exists. But here's what changes everything. The pattern is strong, but it's not unchangeable. It's persistent, but it's not permanent. It's deeply rooted, but roots can be examined, understood, and if necessary, replaced with something healthier. You're not stuck with the financial blueprint you inherited. You're not doomed to repeat the struggles of those who came before you. You have the capacity to see what's happening, to name it, to understand its origins, and to choose differently. The moment you realize your current financial stress isn't really about money, something shifts. The moment you see that the fear is old fear, the guilt is learned guilt, the scarcity is inherited scarcity, you create distance between yourself and the pattern. You stop identifying with it. You stop believing it's the truth. You start to see it as a guest in your mind, a visitor from the past, something you can acknowledge without obeying. And in that space between recognition and reaction, freedom begins to grow. The hardest part is that these patterns feel like truth. They feel like reality. If you grew up in scarcity, abundance might feel dangerous, reckless, or impossible to hold. If you grew up with wealth but emotional coldness, money might feel meaningless, hollow, or tied to loneliness. If you grew up watching one parent control all the money while the other had none, you might either cling to control now or avoid it entirely. The pattern doesn't care what makes sense logically. It cares what felt safe emotionally back then. And because it's unconscious, you don't notice when it takes over. You don't see yourself repeating the exact behaviors you swore you'd never repeat. You don't realize you're following the same track, making the same turns, arriving at the same outcomes. The pattern isn't cruel, it's just efficient. It runs automatically because that's what patterns do. They conserve energy, they make life predictable, they protect you from having to think too hard or feel too much. But in doing so, they also trap you in a loop you never consciously agreed to. Think about the last time you made a financial decision that felt charged. Maybe you hesitated to buy something you needed. Maybe you spent impulsively on something you didn't. Maybe you felt a wave of anxiety when checking your balance. Maybe you avoided a necessary conversation about money. In that moment, you weren't operating from the present. You were responding to the past. The pattern was running, pulling up old files, replaying old scenes, triggering old emotions. And you reacted accordingly, without ever realizing you were being influenced by something decades old. This is how the pattern maintains itself. It stays hidden. It operates in the shadows. It masquerades as intuition or common sense or just the way things are. And because you can't see it, you can't question it. You can't examine whether it's actually serving you or just repeating itself because that's all it knows how to do. The pattern doesn't evolve on its own. It doesn't adapt to new circumstances. It just keeps running the same program over and over, waiting for you to wake up and take the controls. But waking up isn't easy. The pattern has inertia. It has momentum. It's been running so long it feels like the foundation of your identity. Questioning it can feel like questioning yourself. Changing it can feel like betraying your family, abandoning your history, or losing something essential. This is why so many people stay stuck, not because they lack willpower or intelligence, but because the pattern is woven into their sense of self. Changing it requires more than knowledge. It requires courage. It requires a willingness to see yourself clearly, to feel uncomfortable, to sit with the tension of becoming someone new. And yet, it's possible. Not only possible, but necessary. Because the cost of keeping the pattern is too high. It costs you peace. It costs you possibility. It costs you the financial life you actually want, the one that reflects who you are now rather than who you were trained to be. The pattern may have protected you once. It may have been exactly what you needed to survive your childhood, but survival mode isn't meant to last forever. At some point, you have to transition from surviving to living. And that transition begins with seeing the pattern for what it is. Awareness is where everything shifts. Not fixing, not forcing, not immediately changing, just seeing. Seeing that the urgency you feel when money is involved isn't about the present moment. Seeing that the guilt isn't about what you spent. It's about something you were taught to feel long ago. Seeing that the avoidance, the fear, the tightness in your chest, they're not personality traits, they're learned responses. And what was learned can be unlearned. This isn't about blaming anyone. Your caregivers were doing what they knew how to do. They were navigating their own fears, their own histories, their own wounds. But understanding where something came from doesn't mean you have to keep carrying it. You can honor the past without letting it script your future. You can acknowledge the origin of the pattern without giving it permission to run your life forever. Awareness creates space, and in that space, something new becomes possible. When you start to notice the pattern, you begin to see it everywhere. You see it in the way your body tenses when you open a bank statement. You see it in the rush of anxiety before making a purchase. You see it in the way you justify, explain, or apologize for how you handle money, even when no one's asking. You see it in the conflict it creates in your relationships, the way it amplifies fear or resentment, the way it touches everything without ever being fully discussed. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the gift of awareness. It doesn't solve everything instantly, but it breaks the spell. The pattern loses its invisibility. It stops feeling like truth and starts feeling like habit. And habits, no matter how old, can be interrupted. Not erased overnight, not replaced with force, but gently, consistently redirected. You start to catch yourself mid-pattern. You notice the old response rising, and you pause. You breathe. You ask yourself, is this still serving me? Is this still true? Or is this just the echo of something that used to be? This pause is everything. It's the space between stimulus and response. It's where freedom lives. It's where you stop being automatic and start being conscious. And every time you create that pause, every time you catch the pattern before it fully takes over, you weaken its hold. You prove to yourself that you're not powerless. You demonstrate that change is possible. You build evidence that you can respond differently, that you can choose differently, that you're no longer bound by the rules that were written for you before you could speak. The pattern will resist. It will try to reassert itself. It will whisper that you're being foolish, reckless, irresponsible. It will pull up old fears and present them as current dangers. It will remind you of every time things went wrong, every time money was a problem, every reason to stay small and stay safe. But now you'll recognize that voice for what it is. Not wisdom, not intuition, not truth, just the pattern, doing what patterns do, trying to survive, trying to maintain its place in your psyche, trying to stay relevant even though its time has passed. The reprogramming doesn't happen in grand moments. It happens in small ones. It happens when you choose to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. It happens when you make a financial decision from clarity instead of fear. It happens when you speak openly about money instead of hiding or pretending. It happens when you give yourself permission to have a different experience than the one you were trained to expect. Every time you interrupt the pattern, you weaken its hold. Every time you choose differently, you lay down a new track. This process requires patience. You're rewiring neural pathways that have been active for decades. You're challenging beliefs that were installed before you could speak. You're dismantling structures that once kept you safe, even if they no longer do. There will be moments of resistance. The old pattern will try to reassert itself. It will feel safer, more familiar, more reasonable, but that's just the nervous system trying to return to what it knows. That's the brain protecting you from the unknown. And you can thank it, acknowledge it, and still choose differently. You'll know you're making progress when money starts to feel less charged. When you can look at your finances without your heart racing. When you can spend without guilt or save without panic. When you can talk about money without defensiveness or shame. When you stop using it to prove your worth or hide your fear. When it becomes what it actually is, a tool, a resource, a neutral thing that flows in and out, rather than a symbol of everything you fear or everything you need. This doesn't mean you stop caring about money. It means you stop letting it control you. You stop letting the old pattern decide for you. You step into conscious authorship. You begin to make choices that align with who you are now, not who you were trained to be. And in that shift, you reclaim power. Not the power to control everything, but the power to respond consciously, the power to choose, the power to write a new story, one that honors your past without being imprisoned by it. The journey isn't linear. There will be days when the pattern feels distant and days when it feels overwhelming. There will be moments of clarity and moments of confusion. There will be steps forward and what feel like steps back. But every moment of awareness counts. Every conscious choice matters. Every time you pause instead of react, you're building a new foundation. You're creating new neural pathways. You're teaching your nervous system that safety doesn't require the old strategies anymore. And slowly, steadily, something remarkable happens. The new responses start to feel more natural than the old ones. The conscious choices start to feel more comfortable than the automatic reactions. The pattern loses its dominance. It might never disappear completely, but it no longer runs the show. It becomes background noise rather than the main soundtrack. And in its place, something new emerges. A relationship with money that's calm, clear, and aligned with your actual values. A financial life that reflects who you're becoming rather than who you were conditioned to be. There's freedom in realizing that your current relationship with money isn't fixed. It isn't destiny. It isn't who you are at your core. It's a learned pattern, and like all learned things, it can be examined, understood, and transformed. You don't have to carry the financial fears of your parents or grandparents. You don't have to repeat their struggles or their avoidance. You don't have to live in scarcity because that's what you knew. You don't have to prove anything because proving was how love was earned back then. You can step into something different, something conscious, something chosen. You can build a relationship with money that feels calm, clear, and aligned with your actual needs and values. You can let go of the urgency, the guilt, the fear, and the shame. You can stop running from it or clinging to it. You can simply be with it, make decisions from a grounded place, and allow your financial life to reflect the person you're becoming, not the child you once were. This shift doesn't require you to become someone else. It doesn't demand that you adopt a completely new personality or pretend you don't have a history. It simply asks that you become aware of the difference between what's truly yours and what was handed to you. It asks that you examine the beliefs you're carrying and decide which ones still serve you. It invites you to separate your identity from the pattern, to recognize that you are not your conditioning. You are the awareness that can observe the conditioning, and that awareness changes everything. It creates space for choice. It opens the door to possibility. It allows you to respond to your current reality rather than reacting to past wounds. It gives you the freedom to make financial decisions based on what's actually happening now, not what happened 20 or 30 years ago. It lets you build a life that feels authentic rather than automatic, intentional rather than inherited. The pattern will still arise. Old triggers will still surface. There will be moments when you slip back into familiar reactions, but now you'll catch yourself. You'll recognize what's happening. You'll have the tools to pause, breathe, and choose differently. And each time you do, you reinforce the new pathway. You strengthen the new pattern. You prove to yourself that change isn't just possible, it's already happening. This is the work that matters. Not because it makes you perfect, but because it makes you conscious. Not because it erases your history, but because it frees you from being controlled by it. Not because it promises wealth or success, but because it offers something far more valuable: peace, clarity, agency. the ability to stand in your present moment and make choices that align with who you actually are, not who you were taught to be. That's the transformation. That's the freedom. That's what becomes possible when you finally see the pattern and decide you're ready to write something new. You don't have to carry the financial fears of your parents or grandparents. You don't have to repeat their struggles or their avoidance. You don't have to live in scarcity because that's what you knew. You don't have to prove anything because proving was how love was earned back then. You can step into something different, something conscious, something chosen. You can build a relationship with money that feels calm, clear, and aligned with your actual needs and values. You can let go of the urgency, the guilt, the fear, and the shame. You can stop running from money or clinging to it. You can simply be with it, make decisions from a grounded place, and allow your financial life to reflect the person you're becoming, not the child you once were. This is what freedom looks like. Not endless wealth or perfect security, but the ability to move through your financial life with awareness, dignity, and choice. The old pattern will fade as the new one strengthens. Not because you forced it to disappear, but because you stopped feeding it. You stopped giving it your attention, your belief, your obedience. You stopped treating it like truth and started treating it like history. And in doing so, you created space for something better, something more aligned, something that actually fits the life you're living now. This is where the real work begins. Not in understanding the pattern, but in living beyond it. Not in recognizing where it came from, but in choosing where you're going. Not in fixing what was broken, but in building what's possible. The pattern was never your fault. But what you do with the awareness you now have, that's your responsibility, that's your opportunity, that's your power. And the power is real. You're not a victim of your conditioning. You're not doomed to repeat the past. You're not limited by the beliefs that were installed before you had the capacity to question them. You are capable of seeing clearly, choosing consciously, and creating a financial life that reflects your values, your needs, and your vision for the future. The pattern doesn't get to decide anymore. You do. This moment right now, this awareness you're holding, this is the turning point. This is where everything can change, not because the circumstances suddenly shift, but because you do. Because you see what's been running beneath the surface. Because you recognize that you have options. Because you understand that the life you're living with money is the result of choices. And choices can be made differently. The pattern was powerful, but your awareness is more powerful. And awareness, once awakened, cannot be put back to sleep. The journey from here isn't about perfection, it's about progress. It's about catching yourself a little sooner each time the pattern tries to take over. It's about making one conscious choice, then another, until conscious choosing becomes its own pattern. It's about building a new relationship with money, one decision at a time, one conversation at a time, one moment of awareness at a time. And it's about trusting that this work matters, even when the changes feel small, even when the old pattern resurfaces, even when progress feels slow. Because the truth is, you're not just changing your finances, you're changing the trajectory of your life. You're breaking a cycle that may have been running for generations. You're proving that awareness is stronger than conditioning. You're demonstrating that you have the power to become something other than what you were programmed to be. And that matters more than any dollar amount ever could. This is the work that liberates, not just you, but everyone who comes after you. When you break the pattern, you change what's possible for your children, your loved ones, everyone who looks to you as an example. You show them that change is possible. That awareness is powerful. That the stories we inherit don't have to be the stories we live. You become living proof that freedom is real, that transformation is possible, that we are not bound by the past unless we choose to be. So yes, The pattern was real. Yes, it shaped you. Yes, it influenced every financial decision you've made until now. But now you see it, and seeing it changes everything. You are no longer unconscious. You are no longer automatic. You are no longer trapped. You are aware, awake, and empowered to choose differently. The pattern will always be part of your history, but it no longer has to be part of your future. You are standing at the threshold of something new, a financial life that feels calm instead of chaotic, decisions that come from clarity instead of fear, a relationship with money that reflects who you are now, not who you were conditioned to be. This is your moment. This is your transformation. This is where you step into the fullness of your power and claim the life that's been waiting for you all along. If this truth awakens something within you, don't stop here. Your transformation has only begun.